Dead Island 2, 10 years in the making. It certainly has gone through its paces and multiple reboots at that. We finally have it in our hands, and will it live up to our expectations and standards? The original Dead Island scored averagely, never finding its stride, sitting at a 6.7 on Metacritic. I personally played the game and found parts of it very endearing. The weapon system and the colourful characters in the first person certainly added to that. It was brought down by bugs and it had glimpses of greatness, but those glimpses of greatness had specks of impurities all over it. With Dead Island 2, it promises a much grander adventure, better characters, a brand new physics system, and a host of new locations based on real-world LA. It's safe to say that I was excited to start this journey, so let's see how the game played out. Here is your Dead Island 2 review. Enjoy! Without a shadow of a doubt, the first time I glimpsed the trailer for Dead Island 2, the one with the running man, I was intrigued by the setting. Oversaturated colours, nice tunes, and glaring sunshine. Cue the running man. And I really enjoyed the humour that this trailer set out, and as the trailer progressed, it's safe to say that the visual appeal translated well into the actual game. Every second of the game is fused with this over-the-top colour palette, ridiculous outlandishness, and it somehow finds its way into every crevice of the game. The palm trees are swaying, the machetes are flying, and the brains are exploding. It's in a way a poetic contrast, as LA is a scenic place, whereas the action we are involved in takes us to new comedic highs. The flesh system works wonders for the visual spectacle, providing a part-by-part destruction on almost what feels like a cellular level. Smash a kneecap and see it shatter into a multitude of pieces, decapitate an arm and it will be followed by a geyser of blood. The game looks fantastic, and the night and day options really add another level of depth, with the nighttime adding extra weight to the horror aspects of the game. The glowing eyes peering at you from a distance, putting you on edge as you hear distant howls. You can really see this tension builds up as you play the game and go from one area to the next. I'm not very good with horror games personally, and the game sets this perfect balance between horror and comedy. One moment you are greeted with an elderly film star in his robe and underwear, and the next you are watching someone's head get crushed. There were many feelings swirling around inside me, and the characters we do play do a lot to lean into those finer nuances and comedic craft, with their own style and unique visual appeal. Characters are painstakingly crafted, whether it be the zombies or humans. There's lots of details that you can see, further adding to the belief that these last 10 years have really been painful for the devs, but ultimately this is a product of passion. The weapon systems and their accompanying effects are equally impressive, be it fire, electricity, or acid. Everything scorches, melts, and electrifies to an incredible degree, leaning into this flesh system that the developers have created, and it's so refreshing because you've never seen that in a zombie game before. And although I loved the first Dying Light for its tension building and atmospheric changes as you go through the game, the second game was found very wanting in that regard, and I was so happy to see this flesh system shine within Dead Island. So much so that the devs for Dying Light had patched in additional destructive elements to their zombies, but to no avail because Dead Island 2 still holds the trophy for the most immersive and most destructive gameplay in any zombie game ever. As mentioned before, the flesh system really takes the gameplay to a new height. With destructible parts left, right and center, it certainly does make combat feel visceral and responsive to your actions. Need to take out a fast zombie, then you sweep out their legs from underneath them and then you break their kneecaps. How about a big boy? Well, you wait for the counter opportunity and then use acid or bleeding to wear them down. Each decision in the gameplay is weighted heavily, as Dead Island 2 is a lot harder than the first one. Enemies are more aggressive and there is less healing, and not all weapons work against all zombies. Going into a fight without a varied variety of weaponry will often spell doom and disaster, and this very notion provides the bread and butter for this game. Weapons are extensive, ranging from katanas to massive sledgehammers. Each weapon can be customized with a standard mod system allowing you to add the elements and various stat modifiers such as increase knockdown or more damage. and you can visually see the difference each mod makes. For instance, if you equip a fire mod onto your katana, it will glow a hot red, signifying that it will be like a hot knife cleaving through butter when used against your enemies. And sometimes that's the case, but the enemies scale with you, so you don't really arrive at the power fantasy levels of destruction. Each basic zombie will still take a couple of hits to kill rather than one slice, one kill, which is a little disappointing, as there are certainly moments in the game where you need that level of firepower and it just isn't there. In Dead Island 1, you could eventually culminate as this apex predator of zombies, smashing your way through one by one in single hit strikes, which was amazing. This was before the nerfs, of course. Throughout my playthrough though, I was waiting for this increase in power for Dead Island 2 and it just never came. Now, disclaimer here, there are other elements to the game that can increase your power level, but for the sake of spoilers, I won't talk about them here. Behind each weapon is a character, and behind those characters are skill cards, which essentially provide different stat and gameplay modifiers. Each character is unique in the sense that it starts with 2 individualist cards that cater to that specific playstyle. This is a nice touch, but some of the characters are certainly stronger than others. For example, Jacob is a master of fast weapons. The more hits you land, the more damage you do. Whereas Danny is a powerhouse of heavy attacks. You charge up a heavy attack and you smash your enemy and it creates an explosion. These characters are front and center some of the best, whereas you have characters who rely on stealth, which is not very viable when you're considering how many enemies that you're facing, and most of them will aggro to you from quite a far range. So you can see that there's a unbalanced character skill set there. But as you go throughout the world and you unlock more of these skill cards, which are generalist skill cards, it will give you different modifiers. So for instance, you might have the dodge card, which allows you to make a last second dodge. And if you do it perfectly, you can do a counter. But later I switched to a block card, which allows me to, as it suggests, block. And if you do the block perfectly, you do an immediate counter, which for me was a better playstyle. I found it more reliable and safer to use. You will go through these cards and you'll find your preferred playstyle rather quickly, and the brisk introduction of more special zombies means you have to explore better options to kill them rather than just try to run up to them and make zombie wine out of their grey matter. As far as the ridiculous levels ramp up, the gameplay ramps up at the same speed. But this almost serves as a double-edged sword, as the game feels rather one note the entire time. You'll do the exact same thing in every location. Turn on object A, clear zombies, run from point A to point B, press item, clear zombies. It never really hits its stride when it comes to diversification of missions, with the exception of one mission which requires you to do kills in a certain way for a particular influencer. I really wish there were more missions like this with a more diversified approach to a bigger pool of rewards, and often at times you do a side quest and you receive a unmodded weapon which needs a lot of work to bring up to scratch, and the level system in play means you would have to spend a lot of money and currency to bring it to your current level, and it scales multiplicatively, so by the time you're level 30 you'll be paying 50k plus to get a weapon to your level, and that's without the mods costs. The gameplay, although linear, is a lot of fun. You can really see that they cut out the unnecessary parts from the first game and they focus on what makes the game fun, and as of right now, when comparing it to its competitor Dying Light 2, Dead Island 2 provides a more enjoyable and well-rounded experience, and I'm glad they cut out the cars from Dead Island 1 because those were atrocious. As far as stories go, Dead Island 2 is very typical. We are a survivor of the apocalypse and we are immune for some unknown reason. And from us, we must try to fabricate a cure, and so our journey begins. Roll the credits. Now that's pretty much it without getting too spoilery. And there are some twists and turns, but I consider them less twists and more a subtle flexing of the path. The characters are largely forgettable with the exception of Carla, Jacob, Danny, and our protagonist from the last game, Sam B. Sure, there are some colourful side characters, but they are all one note, often leaning on well-used tropes of Hollywood and stereotypes. You'll meet characters that look and sound interesting, but ultimately you never really get to interact with them that much. The ending I felt was highly disappointing and rushed, and I felt like there were probably some production issues and cut content, 10 years in the making and multiple development disasters, no doubt. There were greater plans for the last level, you can tell, but ultimately I can replace the story with a story from any other zombie game and it will be viable to do so. This is just the dice that zombie games have rolled and an acceptable part of the consumer-developer transaction. Unfortunately, being typecasted in that way provides some limitations. The game actually runs well for the most part, with the exception of one thing, and that I painstakingly found through trial and error. In the settings, there is a graphics option called the AMD Super Resolution. This setting does in fact cause hard crashes to your PC. I found this out after numerous crashes on stream, and after losing my patience, I did an hour of research to rectify the issue, and I would highly recommend switching this setting off and leaving it off until there is a specific patch for it. The problem arises when the AMD technology tries to render the items in the storage locker or when you repair said items. The items that you can see are not refreshed properly, and even though they're loaded, the incorrect textures will lead to more crashes. Avoid this option in the settings at all costs until it's fixed. And although, that's quite a big issue, I'm not ignoring that at all, the devs have put in a lot of work to making the game run very well. It actually runs well on multiple different resolutions, and even on high, you can still get a decent frame rate, which is very impressive considering the amount of destruction that is loaded into the game. Now you can see that they've loaded most of the shaders prior to starting the game, and it lets you know that it loads about 20,000 different shaders, which is, I think, a good solution to maintain a good performance. Ultimately, other than the issue that I've mentioned, you can expect a title that runs well and meets the standards you expect from a game of this price. One thing I was truly impressed with in Dead Island 2 was the sound design. In the first Dead Island, I never really noticed much atmospheric music. Of course, there were sounds of the shambling hordes, but other than that, key moments in the story were the only places that had music. You'd move from the beach, to the hotel, to the jungle, and then to the lab, and for the most part there was nothing. Dead Island 2 is very different in that regard. The tension in the atmosphere is thick right from the get-go, and although there are comedy vibes and a more light-hearted nature to the combat and the story, you definitely feel the horror aspect as you're moving from one area to the next. You hear sounds of hordes in the streets, banging on the doors, screams and gunshots in the distance and the sound of a screamer, and there's creaking wood under the steps of zombies and a deluge of horror simps as you go from one place to another, encountering just simple walkers. So much tension just for the lowest level enemy in the game. Admittedly, I'm not very good with horror games, and I found the tension to be unbearable at times, which goes a long way into shouting out the excellent work of the design teams and sound teams here to provide a real and tangible level of feedback when it comes to sound design. The spatial audio was also very impressive, notifying me of enemy positions with almost perfect real-time feedback, allowing me to respond to threats off-screen in a relatively efficient manner. Now, I really love the sound design for Dead Island 2, and there's so much detail in every aspect, from making squeaking sounds on wooden floors, or the acoustic changes of smashing a zombie's skull in a small enclosed environment. These small details really make up the experience for me, and the excellent voice acting supplemented the sound experience. Truly, I think this is one of the best parts of this game, and there was an excellent display of workmanship from the devs. And there you have it. That is your Dead Island 2 review. Ultimately, I think Dead Island 2 is a middle of the pack kind of game, and as with any other zombie game, they have been typecasted into a certain role, and with that role comes restrictions. And despite those restrictions, Dambuster Studios under Deep Silver manages to lead the middle of the pack group with its innovative skill card system, providing visual and tangible benefits to its already excellent combat, supplemented with a really great sound design. This makes for a game that is above average, only to be let down by another lackluster story and predictable plotline. Can I recommend a buy? I suppose this depends on the type of person you are. If you love hack and slashes and zombie games, this is for sure a purchase. However, if you're looking for something to fill your time or perhaps find a new genre to be passionate about, I don't think this is the game for you. I think that there are other games that can fulfill that desire. Now, this is not to take away from the love that the game has by the developers. This is a tremendous game, and I just think that it's let down by a few things. You are going to enjoy this if you're an action enthusiast. Otherwise, I would wait until the price comes down just a little bit, maybe 5 or 10%. It is a good venture, but I just don't think it's worth the price because games are so expensive these days. But anyways, guys, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed the content, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the review. It really helps. And let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game. Anyways, until next time, see you later. Bye.